Drama was a part of the program, too. We had drama. Remember drama? That was the school concert at Christmas time. When the sheets had come out and given around, you got a part in the play, you got a part in the play, you got a speaking part in the play, you got a speaking part in the play, and you learn your lines, you know. Now, there wasn't a great deal of depth into those concerts. I remember in grade 2, myself and Frank Squires had a part to play. I was standing up by a clock, and they moved the hours of the clock, and I had 2 o'clock this afternoon. How did it get here so soon, was my line. and Frank Squires came out, and his lines, I'll never forget it. I saw a fly up on the wall. He died, that's all. I remember one concert we had when they had the big ones in the school recite little nursery rhymes while the little ones came out dressed up in their little Bo Peeps and stuff, you know, in their little nursery rhyme costumes. We were practicing down in the school classroom this day with the stage up in the back, and Ralph Pitts, he was a Limited Devil character. And he was supposed to recite the poem, Mary had a little lamb, his fleece was white as snow, you see, while the little sheep came running out, you see. And for badness, he got up to the stage this day, and right off the cuff, Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was black as tar. Went to school yesterday, going again tomorrow. Now, sports program. Gymnasium was something we didn't have a clue about, but we didn't have PT very often because it was too cold in winter. But come May, we had sports day. We went over on the big field right there by the school, over on the academy field, you remember. All had to wear the blue shorts and the white shirts. We went over. Now, the girls weren't allowed to do anything strenuous like running races or anything. So the boys ran races and jumped the high jump and so on and played soccer, while the girls threw bean bags and the three-legged race and the bag race and made faces at the boys. And that's all the girls were allowed to do. During the summertime, we used to get together and play games like Tibbs and Rounders and Bazin and Piddly, and of course, wintertime hockey, and you head for the ponds. I used to play on Wheeler's Pond over on Bell Island. If you don't know where Wheeler's Pond is, just across the road from 4440 there, just a little ways down from the Ducks Puddle, okay? And we used to go to Wheeler's Pond, and those were the days. You didn't have hockey equipment. You'd make your own hockey sticks. You'd make your pot of meat can or a milk can for a puck, and thank God for Eatons and Simpsons in those days, the 2 catalogs, one to go down the leg of each pants for your shin pads, and that was your shin pads, you know. And as Canon Earl used to say, and I experienced it too, sometimes if you didn't have a puck, you'd use a lump of frozen horse manure for a puck, and that worked the best kind until maybe late in February when the spring thaw came, and your slap shot coincided with a soft puck, and that meant problems too. But the first revelation of my life in education came from Wheeler's Pond and the sports on Bell Island, when one day we was come back from Wheeler's Pond, maybe this time of the year, and it was duckish, you know, it was getting dark, and we were trudging over the marsh to come home. And the first house we got to was Graham James's house, so we went in for a few buns and a drop of milk or something to tide us over till we got home. So we would do that quite often. True story this is, so help me God. Went into the kitchen, Mrs. James was getting the glass of milk for syrup or whatever, and I remember I had these skates on, and they were flicking back and forth because my legs weren't long enough at that time to reach the floor, so just a little gaffer. And they were talking about a boy that was down visiting them this summer, or visiting a friend from up around Colliers, a young fellow by the name of Tommy Power. And one of the women in the kitchen was saying, oh, Tommy Power was down here last summer. What a lovely little boy he was. He was a nice little boy, yeah, so mannerly and so obliging and so nice and so friendly. Never say he was a Catholic. That sort of struck me passing strange, and I'll come back to it a little later on, but that made me wonder. Went on through high school. Now, in high school in those days, you had your diversification. That's true. Your Anglicans did Latin, right? And the United Church crowd and the Salvation Army did French, by and large. Now, the Roman Catholic schools on Ballon, they had it made because they had a boys' school and a girls' school, so they really had a diversified program because the boys did Latin because they were going to be priests and the girls did French. I don't know why, but that's the way it was. Anyway, I had to do Latin, and Latin and I weren't good friends. True story, Mr. Pepper, Bobby Pepper, taught me Latin in grade 9 and 10, and I failed miserably. And I remember in grade 11, we used to have examinations at Christmas. Just before Christmas, I got 5% in Latin. That is a true fact, a true story. And at Easter, I got 0. I went to Mr. Pepper. I said, Mr. Pepper, I got 0 in Latin. He said, yes, my son. I said, I don't think I deserve that. He said, neither do I, but it's the lowest mark I could give you. I said, didn't I have anything right at all on the exam? Yes, my son. He said, you had your name right. But anyway, through blood, sweat, and tears, and the scaling of the marks, I got 50 in June. Now, all through high school, and in fact, all through school, my father, who was a very, very wise man, but never had the opportunity for an education like many of our parents had grade 4, but he was drumming it in my head that I had to get an education, because in those days, your children weren't supposed to fish or go in the mines or go in the woods. They had to get an education and better themselves. That was the way of the people's thinking. And they were very, very, I suppose, far-sighted in their own way in those times. And I remember the first few summers before I finished up grade 11, we didn't know about grade 12 in those days. You know, grade 11 was the epitome, the top of the heap. And I used to work with Dad in driving dump trucks on Bell Island and hauling ore from over on the other side of the island. And I remember one day coming home, he was washing his hands at the kitchen sink, and Mother was getting supper, and he looked a bit down. And Mom said, Will, what's the trouble, boy? He said, Ethel, mate, he said, I expect Merle is going to have to go to college and be a teacher because he's no good to work. So... And I'm going to tell you another true story. Many of the stories this is actual fact. In the spring of the year, Mr. Newick, our principal, passed around a sheet for those who were going to go over to college, and we called it college in those days, to get our education. And I looked at the list, no guidance, and I didn't have the foggiest. Engineering was there. The only engineer I knew was old Tom Power, used to be engineer on the Minico, and I didn't want to work on the boat, so I left engineering out. Arts and science, I thought art was literally drawing pictures and painting. I knew what science was. I wasn't interested. Pre-med, that was doctors. I knew I was too stunned for that, so I left that one out. And education. So my father was telling me all my life I had to get an education, so I checked off education. Came over, sir, the first year, they put me down in Queen's College on Forest Road. Fred Buffett was there, because Mother wanted me to be a clergyman, really, but anyway. I went down to Queen's, and I started to, in those days, you had 5 credits we used to take right through, math, English, and 3 education courses. Came into class one day, Fred Buffett was there, Lewis Goss and Wes Goss from over on Spanish Bay, and I was all flustered. Now, I was in about a month. I said, boys, what are we doing all this stuff for? What do you mean? Oh, I said, all he talks about is classroom management and psychology and discipline and stuff. I mean, it's all right, but what are we learning all this stuff for? And Lewis Goss looks at me, he said, sure, you're taking education? I said, yes, I know I is taking education, but what that got to do with it? Well, he said, you're going to be a teacher? I said, no. And that is where I learned, so help me God, the first time I was going to be a teacher. I mean, the first thing we did when we came over and registered was down to Bowring Brothers to get that red jacket with the moose on the back. Remember that one, Phil? You're a cock of the walk now, you got your memorial jacket. And then came phys ed. We had all to do those, electives and phys ed. Well, my blessed Lord, they put us in the gym, bunch from the Bay. The crowd from St. John's, they were all right because they knew how to bounce the ball, see? We'd get in it. We'd buy our white shirt, $1, with memorial on it, the white shirt. I mean, it was white in September. It was pale yellow by the end of October, And if that wasn't as much of a giveaway from the crowd from out around the Bay, if you didn't tell by their yellow shirt, you always could tell. They had their red memorial shorts down to just a few inches above their knees, and then the underwear hanging down a few inches below that, see? But I remember the first time I went to the gym. He put about 20 or 30 big boys in there, wonder we didn't kill ourselves, and threw out 10 or 15 balls. And we gone helter-skelter all over the gym trying to chase the balls, and we didn't know what we're supposed to do. So dog eating at a little office just off from the gym, many of you will remember, up in Parade Street. So I was the brave one. I figured I'd do something. So I went, I was Mr. Eaton, yes. What do you got to do with the ball? He says, put it in the basket. Okay, so I went out and I walked around the gym, about 10 or 12. I couldn't find our basket out there. So I went back, I said, isn't there a basket out there, boy? He said, there's 4 of them or 6 of them out stuck on the wall. I said, them iron hoops with a bit of fish net on them. Yes. Oh, I said, good enough. So I went out, and I was ever so long trying to get her up, and the back was no bloody good because the ass of her was out of her. She used to keep falling in. So I went back and I told Ned. But anyway, it didn't make any difference. He wouldn't sew up the bottom anyway. So we did PT. Now came the notice one day after we were there for a few weeks. We all had to meet over in the annex. So we went over. Now, got over there. We all had to stand up and talk. This was to separate us for the speech classes, see? And again, another revelation. I found out that I didn't know the difference from H's and no H's and stuff, you know. House and home and all that. And TH's. That was another thing that we were very weak on in those days in our diction. Many times did I stand up with Professor Rowe and recite, 30,000 thoughtless boys thought they'd make a thundering noise, so with 30,000 thumbs they thumped on 30,000 drums. Remember that, Betty? Didn't make any difference, I've got a theory on dropping H's. A lot of people say it's our heritage and our, the hangover from the Cockney speech from England and the Irish accent. I blame it on the church. I mean, I grew up, as you know, an Anglican, and I mean, if you had the experiences I did, you drop H's too. I mean, how many times I go to church with Mother and I have to stand up between her and Dad and sing to the top of my lungs every Sunday morning, Ole, 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 So, little wonder. Anyway, I remember one more story about that. We have to take our turn reading from, prose and from poetry and so on. I remember one time I was singled out, my turn was coming up at the next speech class to read a poem. So remember that big thick book we had of immortal poems back in the mid-50s, that big soft cover book? I went through that one night, searching and searching to find the poem that I was going to read, and I finally found the one I was going to handle. I picked out the Robert Frost poem, Two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and I took the one less traveled. Well, Professor Rowe was very moved by that poem because it was one of his favorites, you see. So he asked me why I picked it, so I like the personification and the metaphorical language and the algorithms and I wouldn't tell him the real reason, see. Do you know what? There's only 4 H's in that poem, that's all. 4 H's. You talk about the good old days. First 3 years in university were not good for me, not good for a lot of young people, no guidance and so on, and probably no vision of where they wanted to go, and I was certainly one of them. And I deliberately failed some courses because I didn't want to be in university. I came back in '58. This is another true story. And I went working in the mines on Bell Island and determined not to go back to university anymore. And of course, Mom's and Dad's heart was broken. On the 2nd of September, or the 1st of September, certainly early in September that year in '58, I came home from work this night, 8 o'clock, and I was washing the hands in the kitchen sink. Father was sitting down at the table. Have a good day at work? Yeah. I was into the Reverend Tommy Smith was minister on Bell Island those days. Talking to Reverend Smith in the post office today. Yeah. Says he needs a teacher in grade 7 down at the academy. Yeah. Told him you'd be down Monday morning. So then that's true. There was a fuss and a fight. I wasn't going to school. You are going to school. I'm not going to school. All weekend we was fighting. Monday morning, Mother got me out of bed, gave me my breakfast, put my book bag on my back, and sent me to school. Now comes for the second revelation. Thank God for role models, because I struck a principal in the academy on Bell Island in '58 by the name of Lester Clark. And he convinced me of a couple of things. Number one, that I liked teaching, and number two, that I could be a good teacher. And I went back to university, and I was turned around, like so many of us were turned around by the role models in our life and the people that we learned from. So I went back, and I did a few more years, and then I went out teaching, and I came to a third revelation in my life, and that is the richness and the wonder and the beauty of the Newfoundland people with their wit and their dialects and their heart. When teaching out in Bombay, had some fun down there, I'll tell you. Down in Bombay, by the way, they have a part of their language that they use down there. They drop the beginnings off their words. Down there, the verb, for example, begin is gin, and the verb begun is gone. And we were practicing for a concert down there a few months after I got down there, and there's one little fellow down there in grade 5, he was going to play the button accordion, and he rattled off the tune this day, and I said, when he finished, I said, Bobby, my son, I said, that's some song, that's some tune you played there. I said, you're just as good as Harry Hibbs. Wipes the nose, looks at me. But once, sir, he said, I haven't even gone yet, you wait like Gins. And then I began to date a teacher out there, a young teacher who was living in from Greenspond, Bonavista Bay. So I started to visit Bonavista Bay, and I started to listen to the people talk down there and some of the stories that were told. Down in Bonavista Bay, they dropped the endings after words. The verb captain becomes captain, the word running becomes running, and the verb asked becomes asked. And this is my old friend Otto Tucker's story, who many of you know. And he told me that one time he went into the post office down in Dark Cove, and he was a captain there then with the Salvation Army. And the conversation went like this. Marn, Captain, Marn. Wedding up in Dark Cove tonight. Yes, he said, I hear there's a wedding up in Dark Cove tonight. She said, you ass up, we's ass up, because if you're ass up, then we're all ass up. You see? And then, when teaching in Corner Brook, getting back to religious education again, we used to have the opening ceremonies out at Herdman Collegiate. And I remember out there one morning, I had the door open. We would have to have a Bible reading, a prayer reading, and then the Lord's Prayer, and you mark your register and get on with class. And one morning, I had my door open, and the teacher across the corridor, he's still teaching, so I'll use his name as George. I won't use his real name. George was having some difficulty with some of the students from Humber out there, misbehaving. And one fellow name was Max Loader, and I knew Max. I had taught him in grade 8 up in St. Matthew's School a year or two before. And George was getting more and more frustrated. He wanted to have the Bible reading, see, and Max wouldn't sit down. And I got my class to stand up. I said, bow your heads and let us pray. And I paused for a moment, and the classroom was silent. And just as I was about to begin the Lord's Prayer, George's voice come booming across the classroom. Max, if you don't sit down and keep quiet, I'm going to go down there and ram this Bible right down your gizzard. And one of the students looked at me. He says, sir, I suppose that's one way of getting the Word of God across, I suppose. Then I left Corner Brook and went to Bay Roberts, replaced Tom Pope. You all know Tom Pope. Tom was supervisor out there. First morning on the job, C. Smith, the superintendent, asked me to go down to Island Cove, so I went down to Upper Island Cove. Got out of the car. Many of you heard this story before, I'm sure, but got out of the car, and as soon as this young fellow spotted me, he knew I was the new supervisor, see? So he was about 10 years old, sized me up. I got out with the briefcase. I said, where's your principal? Mr. Taylor's up on top of the stairs, sir. And he said, I said, very good. And as I walked away, he said, hey, sir, he said, I suppose you're the new pope, is you? And that was my introduction to the wit of Conception Bay. Albert Drover is a principal out there, still over in St. Paul's School in Harbourgate. Many of you know Albert Drover. Albert used to be in the old St. Paul's School down there. Very frustrated, old building, one room built onto the other, had been built up piecemeal over the years, and was wanting a science lab in the worst kind of a way. So one day Smith said to me, C. Smith said, Merle, go down to St. Paul's. He said, meet with Albert, and if there's any way of giving them a science lab, we're going to have to give them a science lab because they need it desperately. Okay. Went down to St. Paul's, children were gone, and that afternoon, Albert and I went to every nook and cranny in St. Paul's School, and the more we walked around, the more we both realized, without saying it, that there was no way you're going to get a science lab in that school, see? No way at all. So Albert was the picture of dejection. About 6 o'clock that evening, he trudged up the steps, sir. And he got about halfway up the steps, he turned around, he looked at me, he says, Merle, me old cock, you're going to tell you one thing. He said, I don't know, he says, how many people, he says, built this school. He said, I don't know. He said, I'm sorry, I don't know who built the school, but he said, I know how many people built the school. I said, how many people built the school, Albert? He said, 2 people built the school. I said, why do you say that, Albert? Because he said, one fella couldn't be that stunned all by himself. I remember down in Greenspond just a few years ago, just before school opened, I was down there and up into their new school, actually, the new Heritage Academy, I believe is the name of it, in Greenspond. And we're walking down, it was up in the back of the community, and I was walking down, and I saw Uncle Tom Burry walking up the hill with his dog, an old dog, gun on the back, cigarette in the mouth, and he going up with the dog, see? There's a dump over in the back of the island down Green Spot. I said, good evening, Uncle Tom, how are you? Fine, Merle, my son, fine. I said, where are you going to this evening? Going over to the dump now, he says, got to shoot me dog. Oh, I said, is he mad? The boy said, he's not pleased, I'll tell you that right now. Another thing I learned when I was over in Bay Roberts was that names were very common because it was a custom to name sons after their fathers and daughters after their mothers and so on. And I hadn't been over there very long when two fellows would continuously call me Foy. How are you going, Foy? So the first chance I had when I met my father, I said, Dad, why do they call me Foy? Well, he said, my son, that's your grandfather's nickname, Uncle Isaac Vokey. I said, oh? He said, yes. He said, my dad, Uncle Isaac Vokey, was a blaster on Bell Island, and he didn't pronounce his words properly. He had an accent. And whenever he would say fire, instead of saying fire for the blast, he would say Foy. And he'd always get ready for the blast, and he would shout out, Foy, Foy, get out, pick one down to the go yet, Foy, you see? So my nickname was Foy, very, very, very common. So I went to my grandfather Goss. I said, Pop, I said, Grandfather Vokey's nickname was Foy. I said, you have a nickname? Oh, yes, my son. He said, my father's name was Josiah, too. He said, so I'm known as Joey Joe. You see, Joey of Joe, Joey Joe. I said, very good. In fact, he said there were 4 or 5 Josiah Gosses over in Spaniards Bay. He said there was my father, me, he said Joey Joe. And he said there was, and by the way, nicknames always had some relevance to where you lived or what you did or something, you see. He said there was another Joey Goss over there, he used to have always a big boil on the back of his neck. He was called Joey Lump, you see. And there was another Joe Goss lived in on Rocky Pond Road in by the swamp, so he was called Joey Frog. And there was another Joe Goss, was called Joe Ram. He had 18 children. I found out about another nickname over there in Upper Island Cove. My dad had a cousin, I guess my second cousin down in Island Cove, a fellow by the name of Uncle Will Young, and he was renowned for watching every cent and being very cautious with his spending, and so he was called Uncle Will Budget. That was his nickname. And there, about 10, 12 years ago, Uncle Will died, and so they brought him up to Haig Young's funeral parlor up there in Spaniards Bay. And the morning of the funeral came, and Walter Crane, Walter Crowbar was his name, he was a carpenter, Walter Crowbar. Walter Crowbar was the pallbearer, you see. So Walter Crowbar was walking up the lane this morning with his blue suit on, see, all dressed up just like Les Carrigan, with his new suit on. And Marky Tosh was leaning over the fence, see. And Mark says, Crowbar, me old cock, we ain't going this morning all dressed up with your new suit on, my son. He says, don't be talking, old cock. Don't be talking. He says, I'm the new Minister of Finance. He says, how come? He says, I got to go up to Spaniards Bay now. He says, bring down the budget. Take you up to the present, you know, even young people today, I believe, have some wit. And I'll just share a couple with you, my own children who went through the school system here in St. John's. I remember Jennifer, my youngest, she's in grade 10. Oh, about 7 years ago, I guess she was in grade 3 or grade 4. Came home for supper one evening and, hi, Jennifer, how did things go today? Oh, not too bad. I said, what'd you learn in school today? Oh, she said, a very interesting day. She said, I learned how to make babies. Oh, I said, how am I going to get out of this one, you know? And I tried to change the subject, but she wasn't going to let me off the hook. I said, and she said, do you want to know how I can make babies? Oh, I said, okay, tell me, how do you make babies? You just change the Y and add I-E-S, you know. Another day, 3 or 4 years ago, Tanya was now in 3rd year. She was in grade 11 at the time, and was asking her one day how her exams were going at Prince of Wales. She said, oh, not too bad, Dad, boy, I think I'll get most of them, but that culture course, she said, that's going to be the death of me. She said, I don't like it. Well, now, I said, Tanya, you got to pass it now, and if you put your mind to it, you'll pass it, and so on. Nah, she said, boy, all he talks about is all them old politicians, she says, and the fellows that are dead, and governments and stuff. She said, I got no interest in it. Well, I said, that might be, but you can learn it. You got to learn it. Well, she said, I don't know. She said, we had a test the other day, and she said, and one of the questions, she said, I wasn't going to do the question. One of the questions was, name 10 prime ministers of Canada. So I was going to leave that one out. But all of a sudden, she said, I remember down where we lived, down the East End, she said, all the streets are named after the prime minister, she said. So I started naming them off. She said, you know, Pearson Street, Diefenbaker Street, McDonald, or not Street, but Diefenbaker, McDonald, and Pearson, and Topper, and was Logie Bay a prime minister? Anyway, time passed in my educational experiences, and I came around working with the NTA, and as Morley reminded me a few minutes ago, as time passed, so did my hair, and he said, probably you'd make a crack about that. True story again, I went down to Greenspan a few years ago. I met an old friend of mine, Jim Nee, down there. I hadn't seen him for about 15 or 20 years since days out in Cornerbrook when he was working out there. Went up on the stage this day, and Jim, now fishing down in Greenspan, went up and gave him a bang on the back of the head. Jim, boy, that you? Turn around, yeah, Vokey, boy, that you? Yes, boy, my God, long, must be 20 years, yes, boy. Long, how have you been? Fine, fine. He sized me up, you know, he said, my son, he said, looks like God has been good to you. And I thought he was talking about the stomach. So I said, yes, Jim, boy, I said, that's one thing I'm proud to say. I said, God has been good to me. Yes, old man, I say he's been good to you. Gave you one face and cleared away enough space for another one. In my work with NTA, with government, with the school trustees, I came to the fourth revelation in my life. And that is very difficult to do things, and this with all due respect to Art Ponder, very difficult to do things without committees, you know, and position papers and conferences. I mean, that's what I spend my life at. That's what we spend our life at, committees. God, I came across an article a while ago I'd like to share with you about committees. It's called The Process, and you've been in committees all week. You may get something out of it. It's a takeoff on Genesis. If God were process-oriented, the book of Genesis would read something like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. The earth was without form and void, so God created a small committee. God carefully balanced the committee with regard to race, sex, ethnic origin, and economic status in order to interface pluralism with the holistic concept of self-determination according to the adjudicatory guidelines. Even God was impressed, so ended the first day. And God said, let the committee draw up a mission statement. And behold, the committee decided to prioritize and strategize, and God called the process empowerment. And God thought it sounded good, and evening and morning were the second day. And God said, let the committee determine goals and objectives and engage in long-range planning. Unfortunately, a debate as to the semantic differences between goals and objectives preempted most of the third day. And although the question was never satisfactorily resolved, God thought the process was constructive, and evening and morning were the third day. And God said, let there be a retreat in which the committee can envision functional organization, can be engaged in planning, and can be objective. And the committee considered adjustment to priorities and consequential alternatives to program direction. And God thought that it was even worth all the coffee and donuts that were supplied. And so ended the fourth day. And God said, let the committee vision be implemented consistent with long-range planning and strategy, and the committees considered guidelines and linkages and structural sensitivities and alternatives and implementation models. And God saw that this was very democratic, and so would have ended the fifth day, except for the unintentional renewal of the debate about the differences between goals and objectives. On the sixth day, the committee agreed on criteria for critical assessment and evaluation. This wasn't the agenda God had planned. He wasn't able to attend the meeting, however, because he had to take the afternoon off to create day and night and heaven and earth and seas and plants and trees and seasons and years and sun and moon and animals and birds and human beings. On the seventh day, God rested, and the committee submitted its recommendation. It turned out that the recommended forms for things were nearly identical to the way God had already created. So the committee passed a resolution commending God for his implementation according to the guidelines. There was, however, some opinion expressed quietly that man should have been created in the committee's image. and God caused a deep sleep to fall on the committee. The theme of your conference is Challenge to Share. And let's look at the future for a moment or two, if I might. Conference on denominational education, we just experienced a few days ago here in St. John's. Conflicting pressure for change. There's a mood for change, people tell us, and I feel it too, and you feel it too. But there are conflicting reasons, in my opinion, for that change. I don't want to be too simplistic, but I might be a little bit accurate if I suggest to you that some of the motivators might be as follows. Church authorities want change. Would survival be the reason? Educators want change. Maybe effectiveness of the system is the reason. Students and parents want change. Maybe increased educational opportunity is the reason. Taxpayers want change. Maybe it's monetary. More scholar for the dollar might be the reason. I've thought about it this past few days, and I think I'm safe in saying we educators and people of Newfoundland know from whence we've come, and we know where we are, but I'm not sure we know where we want to go. We want to go to a public system, I don't believe, don't think we do. We can't stand still, we know we have to change, but I sense a conflict of thought and an absence of vision as to where we want to go. I'm reminded of a book, good book, that I'll suggest to your reading if you haven't read it. It's a little bit old now, but Conflicting Conceptions of Curriculum by Elliot Eisner and Elizabeth Valance, where you get this kind of conflict of rationale and reason. Conference at the NTA had there a few days ago, Exploring New Pathways, the uncertainty about the future. I think we as educators need to negotiate an agreed upon set of goals and a process to achieve these goals. And if we are to arrive at a new and acceptable and more efficient way to administer the system, pathways, conference, pathways and bridges have to be built. It'll take more than an intuitive leap of blind faith, in my opinion. We need some glue, we need some bridges there. One of the bridges, in my opinion, I experienced yesterday when I read Dr. Betty Brett's paper. Betty, I couldn't hear your talk, but that paper is well worth reading, and that kind of values education is one of the glues that I think that we need as we go about the 90s. The challenge for us to find those bridges and to build them for the people that are coming behind us, the students, is one of the big challenges in denominational education sharing that I think we've experienced in some time. I want to read a little poem to you before I conclude on building bridges, which I think sets the scene, at least in my mind, as to the challenge that we have as educators and parents. An old man going down a lone highway came at the evening cold and gray to a chasm vast and deep and wide, through which was flowing a sullen tide. The old man crossed in twilight dim. The sullen stream had no fears for him, but he turned when safe on the other side and built a bridge to span the tide. Old man, said a fellow pilgrim near, you're wasting your strength with building here. Your journey will end with the ending day, and you never again will pass this way. You've crossed a chasm deep and wide. Why build you a bridge at eventide? The builder lifted his old gray head, and good friend, in the path I have come, he said, and there followeth after me today a youth whose feet must pass this way. This chasm that has been naught to me, to that fair-haired youth may a pitfall be. He too must cross in the twilight dim. Good friend, I am building a bridge for him. You know, I've had 50 wonderful years in this province, and I've enjoyed almost every minute of it. I've had many friends and good times, more happiness that I can remember, and certainly more than I deserve. And I'm eternally grateful for that, to have worked with people like people here in this room and throughout this province. But there's one more educational experience I would like to have before I call it a day. Remember Tommy Power back on the pond that I talked about? I'd like to see the day very soon when the children and the young people that we, and the young men and women that we work for and work with, will play together, will live together, will work together, will laugh together, at last be allowed and encouraged to learn together. I'd like for us to say, Tommy is a nice little boy, not because he's Catholic, not because he's Protestant, but Tommy is a nice little boy because Tommy is a nice little boy. Good luck in meeting the challenge, good luck in charting the course, and good luck in building the bridges ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Merle. What can one say other than that you were superb as usual? I'd like to also say that I found my notes and I want to redeem myself. That in real life, Merle is the Executive Director of Newfoundland and Labrador School Trustees Association. He is currently the President of the Canadian Red Cross Association of Newfoundland and Labrador, and also a member of the National Red Cross Association. And with any luck, he'll be off to Ottawa tomorrow for a committee meeting. Moving along, we're going to call on George now. George had a very busy week, and there are a couple of concluding things that we have to take care of before we get into the activities that are planned elsewhere. So, George, if you would.
Dr. Buffett, Dr. Buffett, head table guests, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, before I get into what I'm going to say very quickly, because anything very long would obviously be redundant and superfluous, and I don't intend to get into that after the tremendous talks that we've had tonight. But 21 years ago today, I had a letter from one whose name was Philip J. Warren, saying, "You have been accepted for the master's program in educational administration at Memorial University." I wrote back and I said, I'm not sure I can do it, Dr. Warren, because there's something called a thesis. He said, "Come on, you can do it." So I started. Going up over the stairs, now I always remember it, there was a fellow who met me, and he said, "My name is Lou Parsons, and I heard that you said you couldn't do a thesis. Don't you be so foolish. You can do a thesis, and we'll see that you do it." Next day, and this is true, next day, I met a fellow who said, I'm Fred Buffett. He said, "I heard that you said you couldn't do a thesis."
I told everybody.
"You can do a thesis," he said, "and we'll see that you do it." 7 years ago today, the Honorable Minister sat on my panel in Toronto as an external examiner for a doctoral dissertation. And before we went in, he said, "You can do it." And, you know, it's that kind of thing that made me decide a few years ago to go to the Department of Educational Administration at Memorial. And that's the kind of reason, I think, why I enjoy being there. It's because of the people type of experience that occurs. And I would hope that no matter what happens in the future, that people, that personal thing will not disappear. And it's the kind of interaction I believe that we've had this week that must in some way or another continue. And I just wanted to pay tribute to these three people. I know the others in the department are the same way, but these are the ones who were there at that time. Dr. Snellgrove wasn't. But, you know, they had me believing that I could do a thesis, for goodness sake. Me, you know, grade 11, little small school, Grand Bank. But I did it. And hopefully we'll have more people to do the same kind of thing. So, Mr. Chairman, the first thing that I want to do is just to make 2 or 3 presentations. One of the things that we started to do last year, which kind of helped make the course, was to present certificates to persons who we said successfully completed, and we meant that, because everybody here, after tomorrow, when you get your grade, will have successfully completed. And rather than take time to present them to everybody, then we just thought that we'd do 2 or 3. And I'm going to ask two or three people now to come forward and receive their certificates, along with a pretty nice photograph, too. I must say, good photographer, tremendous job. Some people look pretty good there, some not so good. But I'm going to ask now Terry Young to come forward, and I'll ask Dr. Warren if he'd be kind enough to present the certificate and the photo to Terry. Lynn, would you come up as well, please? Lynn Martin has been one of our group facilitators, and on behalf of the whole group, we want to say thanks to Lynn as well. And I'm going to ask Dr. Parsons if he will be kind enough to make that presentation to Lynn. And to people who have really made the course, I think, this week, namely our 12 graduate students. One of them is represented, you here at the table, Linda Fizzard, and I'm going to ask Dr. Buffett if he would be good enough to present them to Linda.
Thank you very much. Congratulations, Linda.
Finally, this one I saved for myself, because one of the persons who has done just an outstanding job over the last 4 years with this course, without whose assistance and cooperation, encouragement and loyalty, probably it wouldn't have all come together. And I thought it would be appropriate to have a little something special for Beverly Des Moines. It's also, he's some anxious here. We got 3.5 minutes. I want to take the opportunity as well to say a very sincere thank you to all of the agencies who have supported us in the last 4 years, not only with their financial assistance. Obviously, that's important, and without it, we just would not be able to mount a course of this nature at this kind of cost. And we certainly do appreciate that. But we also appreciate the support and the cooperation and the assistance and all the other things that they do for us, without which we just could not get by. The planning committee over the last 4 years essentially has remained the same. There are very, very few changes. Tremendous job, great bunch of people to work with, and certainly ones who have everything to be proud of. Communications workshop. Rather interesting experience, some of you. I forgot to bring along some of the notes I was going to share that were written during the communications nets. However, a very special thanks to my 6420 group for a superb job, not only in the training experience, but I'm sure you will agree, those of you who went through it, that they did a great job. Special thanks as well to Linda and to Ralph. I know they'll be glad when tomorrow comes, because I've been driving them absolutely mad, but never a complaint, always with a smile, and the amount of work that they've done behind the scenes that you know nothing about has really helped, bring this whole thing together. Various presenters, some of whom are here tonight, we appreciate your presentations. The substantive content, I think, as well as the eloquence and the whole manner in which this has been done, is completely unsurpassed, and we want to thank you. The ETV persons who've done a great job, to Mrs. Buckingham and her staff, for everything that we've enjoyed this week. The meals have been absolutely out of this world. I'm sure everybody will agree. And to Dr. Buffett for doing his usual great job, a very special thanks. And the final thing I want to say is that I believe that maybe the time has come in this province where we need some kind of cooperative venture by way of a leadership training center for groups like this and other groups. I think that that time has come. I believe a lot of duplication could be avoided. Perhaps there's a need that can be met across the province, not only here in the city. Perhaps there can be a focus whereby parts of conferences like this can be offered to other parts of the province. Maybe down the road, before too long, this kind of leadership concept that seems to work elsewhere, but that would never work as well elsewhere as it would here, because of the kind of people we have who would make it work. I think that maybe that time has come. One hears some rumors to it, and I only hope, as the torch is passed to somebody else to take on ventures of this nature, that before too long there will be a leadership center of some kind to carry on this kind of venture for people who not only want it, but who enjoy it. Tomorrow, Dr. Parsons, in his address tomorrow morning, is not only going to tie together everything by way of a synthesis, but is also going to look ahead to the future as well as reflecting a bit on the past. And I'm sure you're all looking forward to that address. I know that we'll get the usual kind of address from Dr. Parsons, and we are looking forward to that. So again, while the opportunity is here, thank you very much for your cooperation, for your assistance. It's been a real pleasure working with you. And now we have a minute and a half left, Chairman.
George, I was trying to get in there. It wasn't because I was trying to cut you off. It was because we plugged in a new item that you don't know about. Terry, where are you?
Thank you very much, Dr. Buffett, head table guests, ladies and gentlemen. I was asked today to do a couple of things. First of all, to pick up a little thing of thanks for a couple of people here, as well as to thank everybody, Dr. Hickman, and your organizing committee for the job so well done. We really enjoyed the last 5-6 days. You did a tremendous job pulling us all together and organizing all the presenters, drawing us all together within certain themes. You did a great job, sir. I also would like to thank the facilitators, Bev and John, Huey and Jennifer, Ed and Roberta, Lynn and Calvin. They've done a tremendous job. The graduate students, the Littledale people, media people, presenters, coffee break sponsors. I don't like coffee, but thank them anyway. Dr. Parsons, and the various school boards, sir, that contributed greatly to this. So I would like to ask all the participants to join in a strong, warm hand of applause for everybody. So I went shopping. As you can tell, I didn't spend my own money because I got a Burke's bag. The first gift is for your right-hand person, Bev Lemoyne. It's from Laura Secourt. Was $17.95, 50% off. You know, a lot of us have been quite successful with education, and we have to thank a lot of people who helped us get there, you know, outside of our parents and our family and so on. I had to thank two special individuals here tonight who were my principals as I went through. First one is Mr. Lorne Wheeler, and he was principal when I was in high school at Herdman Collegiate in Corner Brook. And as you can see, he did a great job. So Lorne is not really as young as he looks. Second person is none other than the person who I had to follow, and it's a hard act to follow, I tell you. Hard act to follow. So I learned to speak from him, Merle Vokey. Now, Merle was vice principal when I was only in grade 2. Merle left out a few things that I thought about while I was listening to him speak. You know, he talked about everybody else. Some people accuse me as being somewhat of a disciplinarian. That's what I can remember most about Merle. He told me tonight about Lionel Penny. How after Lionel misbehaved so many times, he put him over his knee and spanked him. Great discipline, Merle. And he never told us about when we used to have our hair too long, they'd bring us down to the furnace room and cut our hair. Mostly out of envy, I'm sure. But of course, the ace in the hole for Merle's disciplinarian stand was his wife. I remember Merle coordinating Sunday school. Back in those days, they used to have a big wall that used to serve, well, it seemed big at the time, a big wall in old St. Mark's School, one of those so many small schools that got torn down along the way, in good time, of course. So they used to pull the wall apart, and they used to have opening ceremonies. Merle, you can remember that, I'm sure.
Mrs. Bay playing piano.
Poor old Mrs. Vey died 80-something years of age, she was. She was my kindergarten teacher. She gave me more than one strap. But anyway, one day, myself and another laddie-o, you know what some of us were like in grade 2, me not very often, but this one day I was. He came down and he said, we're supposed to stand still for something or other, probably just to make our legs cramp. And he said, my son, what's your name? Of course, I told him. What grade are you in? 2, sir. I'm telling my wife to talk to you tomorrow. She was my homeroom teacher. But Merle, you've really done well. Mr. Tom Codd, Mr. Screechin, I'm proud that you've done so well. Another fine, distinguished honor of yours to be promoted to that. Now, Dr. Hickman, I've got a couple of things to give you here, sir. The first one is from Ed Mackey. Would you please come up? This is from Ed, sir. Would you open in front of everybody?
You're sure about this, Terry?
Not a bomb. It comes in 2 parts, actually. You said along the second part here. But being a democratic person as I am, sir, we'll let everybody vote on it.
That was too expensive.
I'll let you consider that, okay, sir.
Right. Thank you.
And Dr. Hickman, I would like to thank you, sir, for bringing such a large group together, for bringing such a wide variety of speakers together. I'm basically new as an administrator. This is my first year, but I learned a lot. But I've also listened to a lot of other people who've been administrators, principals, vice principals for in some cases close to 20 years. They've learned a lot, sir. So on behalf of everybody here, not only the students of the course, the short course 1990, but everybody, I would like to present this to you, sir, and thank you very much.
Terry Young, folks. Thanks very much, Terry. Dr. Parsons, some concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Buffett. You know, I've really been impressed with this short course. really impressed with the esprit de corps that has been so evident here, and the fellowship and people working together. Last night I went home and discussing this with my wife, hearing you people participating in that marvelous debate about denominationalism and where we are going. Your positive stance is really something to make one proud. And again, I really want to thank Dr. Hickman for providing this leadership and bringing us all together and to discuss the problems of education and look for a solution. I'd ask you to give him one more hearty applause.
Thank you, Lou. That, as far as I know, that brings us to the end of this evening's activities. We trust you've enjoyed a beautiful meal. We just have left to sing the Ode to Newfoundland, the first and the last verses that you'll find on the back page of your brochure. And following that, there are some entertainment activities outside in room 2, is it, Merle? So if you would, Merle, would you lead off for us, please, to sing this ode?